Welcome to From the VC's Bookshelf, a podcast from TBR, the College System of Tennessee, the state's largest higher education system. In this series, we examine how we might re-envision the work we do and how we work together as we move into a post-pandemic world. Please join our host, Dr. Heidi Lemming, Vice Chancellor for Student Success, as she leads a live discussion with industry experts and leaders throughout our system.
In our Fall 2024 podcast series, I'm pulling from a selection of articles and books that showcase current topics in the field of student success and student services. Interviews with the system and campus level staff who work in the specialty area connected to the article or book will serve as our panel experts. The central theme behind the fall series is about how various functional units housed under the student success umbrella are working across the TBR system to address the challenges and opportunities that are front and center as our institutions pursue the goal of increasing student success rates. In this podcast, I'll be featuring the article from Nachman and the Community College Review titled, What Do We Have to Do? Community College CTE Faculty Perceptions, Preparedness, and Propositions in Supporting Disabled Students' Employment Opportunities. Excited to have two experts in the field of disability services as our panelists today. The first is Leslie Smith. She is the manager of the Access Center, formerly known as Disability Services, at Volunteer State Community College, where she's been employed for the past 7 years. She's worked with individuals with disabilities for more than 37 years, first as a vocational evaluator for ARC of Southwest Indiana, and then by performing psychological evaluations for the Indiana Department of Mental Health and Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. After earning her master's degree in clinical psychology, Leslie worked at the University of Southern Indiana for 23 years as an assistant director of counseling and for 5 years in Vincennes University as director of disability services. During her tenure at USI, she developed a fully functioning disability resource program. Leslie has served on the board of the Tennessee Association on Higher Education and Disability, also known as TENAHED, for the past 5 years. Most recently in the role of president. Thank you, Leslie, for sitting with me today.
Thank you, Dr. Lemming. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. The second panelist is Kristina Krau Waymire, who serves as the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Support at the Tennessee Board of Regents. In this capacity, she works with the state's 24 community and technical colleges on matters involving student leadership, conduct, disability services, accessibility, Title IX, low-income student supports, and mental health and well-being. Prior to her time at TBR, Kristina accumulated over 18 years of combined experience working in higher education, particularly student leadership and development, residence life, and student life at Southern Oregon University, University of Oklahoma, Butler State Community College, and Watkins College of Art. Kristina has earned a Bachelor of Science from Southern Oregon University, a Master's of Science in Adult and Higher Education from the University of Oklahoma, and is currently a student in the PhD Leadership and Decision-Making program at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. Thanks again for sitting, Kristina.
Super happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, excited to have this conversation to raise awareness with our listeners about this field of disability services, broadly access, and how we're working with students to help them pursue their dreams of a post-secondary education and the role that staff in this field are playing on our college campuses. And you all are both good examples of folks doing that work and that can speak on behalf of a larger group of folks doing it. So thank you. So again, article today that we're leaning into looks at CTE faculty perceptions of preparedness and propositions in supporting disabled student employment opportunities. And before we start, because I don't expect our listeners to have read the article necessarily, I think it might be good for us to just do a high-level overview of the major, I guess, features of the article. Kristina, do you mind sharing that with us?
Absolutely. Thank you. So the purpose of this study was really to explore how community college CTE faculty members aim to support disabled students in their career pursuits. And some of the findings that came from that, we're looking at community college faculty and how they hold mixed perceptions and limited understandings of disabled individuals' experiences in the CTE fields, and how that may affect disabled students as they look to pursue these professions. And then also it looks at possessing various ideas for how to better enable students' success, including bolstering some of those disability awareness and acceptance ideas. Additionally, it talked about some of the processes that shape faculty engagement with minoritized students. The study also revealed opportunities for growth in how community college faculty, as well as other practitioners, may address issues surrounding building up disabled community college students' employment pathways.
Okay, great. So that's a really good overview of what we're going to talk about today. And specifically, I think one of the first questions that kind of comes to mind is just hearing a little bit more about the barriers that students are facing, particularly if they've got disabilities, when they're entering our institutions or if they're trying to pursue a post-secondary credential. So, Leslie, you're on the front lines. I'm sure you have lots of stories, but, just generally speaking, what do you see are some of the barriers that they face?
So many people think that the disability itself is a barrier to a student when they enter higher ed. And what I've found is that it's not so much the physical obstacles a student is encountering, but attitudinal. It's the way people perceive them. And there's a big push right now with a focus on ableism. And ableism is pretty much dictates that only people who are able-bodied are able to be successful in certain types of careers or with certain activities. And that's an attitude that holds so many students back. And so it's trying to overcome some of those attitudinal barriers that are the biggest obstacles to students today.
And Kristina, you work more closely with our technical colleges in this space, kind of serving as their advocate. They have staff on their campus too, but maybe don't necessarily have the same number of students that they're serving as a community college and having a full-time person devoted to that work. What are some things that maybe you've heard around barriers?
Yeah, I think I appreciate that Leslie highlighted those attitudinal barriers, because that certainly is a barrier that is prominent. I think also with our technical colleges across the state, some of the things that they're working with is students maybe coming with experiences through the K through 12 where they've been told or maybe led to believe that they might not be capable of something. And that's absolutely not true. And so we're having to help rewire that thought process and help students realize that you're capable of it. You certainly have been working in this space, and how they can, how we can support students and help them break down some of those misperceptions. I think a lot of times we are our strongest critics. And so if there have been people in our past that might be contributing to some of that negative self-taught, that is what we're needing to help overcome.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and one of the things that you both have already started to talk about are these perception issues. So, individuals who have connections to the disability community generally obviously have favorable perceptions of individuals with disabilities. And so how would we maybe use that knowledge and awareness of the student experience to help dispel those misperceptions or misconceptions?
Number one is education, education, education. And one of my favorite sayings is that awareness is the first step to change. And so what we need to do is really broaden that awareness about people with disabilities and what types of things they're capable of, and focusing more on the strengths that an individual brings to, whether it's the classroom, the educational program, to the job, instead of focusing so much on the weaknesses or the disability itself. Relationship development is so essential to all of that. And what I found when I went to my last institution, what I found was that people were saying, "Oh, we don't really need you to do that." And And so I found that I was being faced with the kind of an identity crisis. What can I do to help students with disabilities? And so I talked to the students, and inevitably they would say, well, faculty are the issue. They don't provide accommodations. They don't know how to provide accommodations. So I decided to go to the faculty themselves. And I said, and I first came upon a brick wall. They thought I was there to chastise them. And the first question I asked was, what are the biggest barriers you have to working with students with disabilities? And I immediately started to see that barrier drop. And they were very vocal about, oh, this is what we need. This is what we don't have. And one of those things was, we don't know what we're doing. We don't understand disabilities themselves. We don't understand what accommodations are, or how to provide them, or how can we provide them with the resources we have. And so that relationship development was just absolutely essential. So communication, too, is key with all of that. Letting people know, you're not in this alone. We're in this together. Let's learn together. Let's open up some of that dialogue and find out what's going on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I could see where a faculty member who's never had to make an accommodation before could be really intimidated by that process and not being sure themselves of the work that they might need to do to make something accessible.
And not knowing how to advocate for the resources they need, because sometimes they don't even know what types of resources they need. And so that's why people in my field, in our field, are extremely important.
Right, exactly. Kristina, any thoughts?
I would absolutely mirror everything Leslie said. I think those conversations are incredibly important. You have to have conversations with students, faculty, even thinking beyond when students are looking to enter those CTE fields, having conversations with employers. The article discussed a little bit about employers being mildly uncomfortable or not sure of how they might pursue or grant accommodations for students with or individuals with specific disabilities. A lot of that is really just opening up conversations and talking through what we don't understand.
Why do you think people are so hesitant to have those conversations? Are they?
We're afraid of what we don't know. I mean, that's very uncomfortable, and change is uncomfortable. But even positive change causes what I've told students before. Change is uncomfortable because we have to adapt to it, which means we have to look at things from a different perspective sometimes. And that's scary to a lot of people.
You know, the article also mentions this phenomenon of self-selection where individuals with disabilities may choose career paths where they avoid restrictions to kind of circumnavigate, asking their employer for accommodation. I would like to hear, from your perspective, how prevalent you think that is for students at college and actions that you've maybe witnessed that help mitigate that practice.
I see a slight variation of that.
Okay.
Not so much that students will avoid certain career paths, but what they'll do is they'll avoid accommodations at all costs because they're so afraid they'll, first of all, be identified as an individual with a disability, or that they will be perceived as not being employable because they will need accommodations. But what they often do is they'll set themselves up for failure in college. And so they'll get into even some of their basic core courses, such as English or math, and they won't request accommodations and do poorly. And then you'll see them starting to repeat those courses. And just to encourage them that you don't have to use every accommodation under the sun. Just use what you need in what particular situations. And to look at accommodations just as a matter of fact, not put too much weight in, I can't do anything without these. Instead, this is what gives me the opportunity to do my best. And so students will hesitate to even request those accommodations. And then I think I see a lot of students who will come in with maybe an overinflated view of their abilities and really unrealistic. And so they'll say, I'm going to be a psychologist. I had a student who said, I want to be a psychologist. And I explained, well, you have a disability in math, and you know that math is required because you have to have statistics. And she said, oh, well, in high school they told me that can just be waived. And so I think, too, we're looking at some of the high schools who have a greater focus on a good career program or good career education, have students who come in with a more realistic view of what they're capable of doing. And I think that will go either way, whether it be students who are afraid to self-identify because they're afraid they won't be employable, as well as those who have an overinflated view of what their abilities are.
And of course, we rely on students at this level in post-secondary. You have to self-identify because a lot of disabilities are not visible to the naked eye, by the way, right? And increasingly, that is the classification of disabilities that we're serving more and more, folks with other kind of psychological disabilities rather than like the physical disabilities that I think people generally are aware of. And so, we've over the years been tracking how many students we're serving in our community colleges, and the number is increasing every year. It keeps growing. Either people are getting tested earlier, or there's just this greater awareness, right? And there's almost like now maybe a little less stigma with it, but they still have to self-identify. And so if they're like, well, I just don't want people to know, and people aren't going to see it, right?
Yeah, and we see that. So 12% of individuals nationwide identify as having a disability, but at our community colleges, we may have 2 to 4 ish percent on average. It's about 4% of students who identify as having a disability and have registered with the disability services offices for accommodations. So there is still a little bit of a gap as far as who's identifying. Yeah.
So part of our job too, I would imagine, when we think about, and Kristina, you can talk about this even from the system level perspective, this dispelling of misconceptions is also just on the campus to kind of normalize this in some way to ask for help, right?
Sure. And I think that could be true of all students, right? Like there are services certainly out there to help our students, low-income supports, as far as food pantries and things like that, but certainly disability services. There's twofold to that. The awareness, do you have the awareness that exists? And then are you seeking that out once you do have that awareness? And there is still some of that stigma with any of the services, how far as students are accessing those.
Yeah, but so it's like just, again, add it to your toolbox, whether you use it or not. It's always to your advantage to have that tool available in case you do, correct? And tutoring's people take advantage of tutoring and other things. And, that's just part of what we offer to all students.
The most successful students are the ones who use all of the resources available to them. And disability services is simply just one of those resources.
Yeah. Any stories that you've heard about student self-selection in different career fields, Kristina?
Not recently, but several years ago, I was, my mom used to teach nursing at a community college in a different state. And there was a student who was hard of hearing and was told that she could not be a nurse. And I think we're moving away from that rhetoric and exploring additional areas, but that always sticks out in my head as far as what people can and cannot do and versus what they're told they can and cannot do.
Right. And of course, there's always emerging technologies to assist with a lot of that as well. Changes all the time. What are some helpful practices you've seen community college faculty use to support disabled students in their career pursuits? Kristina, I might start with you on that one. No? You want to go to the other? Leslie?
Sure. One of those, I think, is just the openness that I'm starting to see faculty opening up their doors and saying, come see me anytime, encouraging student self-advocacy. And I think that's a lot of the students who come to higher education oftentimes have not learned how to self-advocate. And then they're afraid to. They're afraid to talk to their faculty members. But when the faculty present that open posture, it really encourages those students to come in and talk to them. And that goes back to attitude. It shows that I'm willing to work with you. I'm willing to meet you where you are. And then there are those faculty who really embrace universal design. I mean, it can be as simple as choosing books for a course, or if a department chooses the books for an English course that also have electronic textbooks. Electronic textbooks work for a lot of different people. I mean, people say, oh, you only want those if you have a learning disability in reading. And yet my mother, who was an English professor, she reads a copious number of books every week, and she listens to them on tape because she said, I can do other things at the same time, but I can still absorb all of that material. Mm-hmm. And so electronic texts benefit people who are not disabled as well as people with disabilities. And then when faculty are open to accommodations as kind of a matter of course. It's a matter of practice, instead of making a big deal about it. I've had faculty who have said over the years, oh my gosh, I can't do that. And then I have other faculty saying, sure, not a problem. Just help me, guide me with that. And all of those types of things help to encourage students to come forward and open up and be more receptive as well as more successful.
You mentioned a term that I don't know that all of our listeners will be familiar with, so maybe we could spend just a second describing for folks Universal Design for Learning, UDL. What is that?
Universal design has been around since the 1960s. Mm-hmm. It was first applied to architecture. And if you have ever used a curb cut, or if you have ever used the electronic doors at a grocery store, then you are engaged in taking advantage of universal design. It's a way of making the environment as accessible as possible to the most number of people possible. And so if you create an environment that offers many different modes of learning, for example, if it really encourages students to learn visually, learn auditorily, get deeply involved in the work with kinesthetic learning, then you're going to reach the most number of people, and it will also help people retain that information better and learn better and be more successful.
Yeah, that's great. So really, universal design for anything, whether it's learning or in a facility type of environment, right? Infrastructure, it makes all of our lives better.
Yes.
And it also makes it accessible for those that need it. So that's great. Thanks for describing that a little bit more because I think everyone has used those services. So we should be mindful of the advantages of being in environments that offer things that are designed universally. What about you, Kristina? Anything you want to add to that?
No, going back a little bit to your earlier question, thinking about how students can connect to faculty. Last semester, you had done podcasts discussing the book, Why College Matters. And the authors in that book were highlighting the importance of student connection to individuals and helping to alleviate some of those feelings of alienation and increasing student belonging. Yeah. And one of the things Leslie had said was talking a lot about the importance of the role of faculty members. And one of the things that those authors had suggested was directly to students and asking them to connect to a faculty member and really getting the most out of their collegiate experience in that time of transformation. So I think that is an important tip and thing to think about, not only for students, but also for faculty members who might be that person for those students. Yeah, that's a great point, because everything that we do is really focused on having learners feel like they belong on campus, that they're welcomed on campus. Students are overcoming challenges every day, and that's certainly true for students with disabilities. Y'all have some stories that you are inspired by that you maybe want to share of a student who overcame a challenge?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to focus on one when I first came here to Vol State. There was a student who had been attending off and on for 14 years. And she was in an early education program. Her disabilities were anxiety, and she had a learning disability in math, very mild, and she also was on the autism spectrum. And so from that, what I saw was that she had taken math 7 times and had failed 7 times. And she didn't, because she had a disability, she was on the spectrum, she didn't have a lot of resources on campus she felt connected to. She really had a difficult time talking to people, and then her anxiety made it even more difficult for her to seek out a lot of resources. So she submitted a request for a substitution of the math requirements for the program. Well, we hit a lot of brick walls with that, and it wasn't really clear that that was the most optimal path for her. So I went to the vice president for academic affairs, and I sat down with him and I said, help me here. We've got to come up with something, because she's really dedicated. She goes every single day for tutoring in the Learning Commons, and she has still failed math 7 times. So we put on our thinking caps, and we came up with the idea that maybe it was finding the right professor for her. And so we set her up with a professor who is well known. He's very vocal about his disabilities, and also about his love for math and working with students. And so we set him up with her. We put her in his class. And she came to me after 1 week and she said, oh my gosh, he understands me. He helped her to feel like she belonged there. And that what she was experiencing, she was not the only person in the world who experienced that, because he talked about his own anxieties. He was willing to be open with her about his own personal challenges. And what we found was this student just absolutely thrived in the environment with him. And she passed with a B.
That's great.
Wow.
And did it on her own.
Yeah.
What incredible perseverance, but also finding that person who's going to support you. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, again, reiterates what we were just talking about, where, if you can break down those misperceptions, and if faculty are really leaning into supporting students and understanding their journey and creating a place where they do feel like they belong, the difference that can make in a student's life. You have a story, Kristina?
I do. So this was at when I was working at a small art college here in Nashville, and we had a student who was a veteran student and had several instances where her PTSD presented itself in class. So she had asked her instructors for some accommodations, and they didn't quite necessarily understand the student experience. It goes back to that student experience. Everybody's experience is going to be different in how they perceive and internalize things. And so we were able to, that student was able to link up in a different class. And it was so simple. The student really just needed to sit at a location where their back wasn't to the door, and that there weren't loud noises. So we closed the classroom door. Something so simple made all the difference in the world for this student, and just provided a space for them to sit where they felt comfortable so that they could learn and they weren't thinking and worrying about external factors.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I've enjoyed just hearing some of the stories, number one, but also just, again, the ability to share with a larger audience the work that you all are doing and the importance of that and supporting students. So thank you for highlighting this article, but also just highlighting your profession to our listeners today.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all those across the state who are doing this work at our community and technical colleges. Really appreciate them. Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Again, yes, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to this edition of From the VC's Bookshelf, brought to you by TBR, the College System of Tennessee, powering the state's economy and changing the lives of thousands of graduates, starting successful careers each year. To learn more about upcoming book selections or to register to attend discussions live, visit tbr.edu/bookshelf.